Abandoned at the altar. A mail-order bride's fight for freedom. The train's whistle cut through the Wyoming heat like a scream. Evelyn Carter stepped onto the platform, her heart hammering against her ribs as she scanned the crowd for the man who'd promised her a new life. But William Garrett wasn't there. The platform emptied. The sun beat down mercilessly. And then she understood. She'd been abandoned before she'd even arrived. Alone in a strange town with $17 and a suitcase full of borrowed hope, Evelyn felt the weight of every stare, every whisper. Then a small boy with tear-streaked cheeks broke through the crowd and threw his arms around her waist, burying his face in her skirt. "Mama?" he whispered, the single word fracturing something deep in her chest. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Evelyn's story travels. And if you're curious whether she finds her way home, stay until the very end. The boy's father reached them in 3 long strides, his face carved from the same unforgiving stone as the mountains behind him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of storm clouds, gray, distant, and guarded. His hands, rough and calloused, gripped the child's shoulders gently but firmly, pulling him back. "Noah, we talked about this." His voice was low, careful, as though he were trying not to shatter something already broken. "But Papa, she looks like—" The boy's words dissolved into sobs. "She's not your mama." The man's jaw tightened, and for a moment something raw flickered across his features before he locked it away. He looked up at Evelyn then, and she saw the exact instant he registered her situation. The trunk at her feet, the traveling dress wilted from 2 days on the rails, the telegram clutched in her trembling hand. "I'm sorry, miss. My son, we lost his mother 6 months back." The words came out flat, practiced, as if he'd said them so many times they'd lost all meaning. He doesn't understand yet. Evelyn's throat burned. She wanted to say something gracious, something that would ease the awkwardness settling between them like dust, but all she could manage was, "It's all right." It wasn't all right. Nothing was all right. The man studied her face, then glanced at the telegram. "You waiting for someone?" "I was." Evelyn forced herself to meet his eyes. "William Garrett. Do you know him?" Something dangerous shifted in the stranger's expression. His hand dropped from his son's shoulder, fingers curling into a loose fist. "I know him." The way he said it made Evelyn's stomach drop. "He's not coming, is he?" "No, miss, I don't believe he is." The man looked away toward the mountains as if the answer might be written somewhere in those distant peaks. "Victor Langdon, goes by William Garrett sometimes, among other names. He's got a reputation. Brings women out here with promises, takes what money they have, then disappears before the ink dries on the marriage certificate. If he didn't show today, it means he already got what he wanted." Evelyn's vision blurred. The $17 in her handbag, it was all she had left after paying for the train ticket he'd insisted she purchase herself. Her mother's wedding ring, sold to cover the fare. The small inheritance from her aunt sent ahead to help establish their household. All of it, gone. And she was stranded 1,500 miles from Boston with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. "I see." Her voice sounded strange, distant, like it belonged to someone else. The crowd had thinned, but a few stragglers remained, their curiosity sharp as broken glass. She felt their stares like brands against her skin. Pity mixed with judgment, the particular contempt reserved for women foolish enough to trust, desperate enough to hope. The man shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "You got family back east?" "No." The word came out smaller than she intended. "No one." Noah had stopped crying, but he still watched her with those enormous brown eyes, his small hand clutching his father's coat. The resemblance between them was striking. The same strong jaw, the same thick dark hair, the same expression of carefully contained grief. "Listen," the man said finally, his voice rough. "I can't leave you standing here. The boarding house is 2 miles into town, and it's not—" He paused, choosing his words. "It's not a place for a woman alone. My ranch is an hour's ride north. It's not much, but it's decent. You can stay there tonight, figure out what comes next in the morning." Evelyn's pride reared up instinctively. She'd spent the last 3 years caring for her dying father, then another year as a seamstress in a cramped boarding house, sewing until her fingers bled just to keep a roof over her head. She'd accepted this mail-order arrangement because she'd run out of options, not because she was helpless. But pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. "I can work," she said. "I won't take charity. I'm good with a needle. I can cook, clean, manage a household. If you'll give me shelter, I'll earn my keep." Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "Fair enough. Name's Jacob Hale. This is my boy, Noah." "Evelyn Carter." Jacob nodded once, then turned toward a wagon hitched nearby. "We'll collect your trunk." The ride north was silent except for the creak of wagon wheels and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. Noah sat between them, his small body warm against Evelyn's side. She could feel him stealing glances at her, quick and furtive, as if he were afraid she might disappear if he looked too long. The landscape unfurled in shades of gold and amber, endless sky pressing down on endless earth. Mountains rose in the distance like sleeping giants, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat. The air smelled of sage and dust and something wild she couldn't name. It was beautiful and brutal and utterly foreign, nothing like the narrow cobbled streets of Boston, the pressed gardens, the ordered civility of everything she'd known. "First time west?" Jacob asked. "Yes." "It's hard country. Takes getting used to." Evelyn looked at the horizon, at the vast emptiness that seemed to swallow sound and hope alike. "Everything's hard when you're starting from nothing." He glanced at her, and for the first time she saw something like understanding in his eyes. "I suppose that's true." The ranch appeared gradually, emerging from the landscape like it had grown there. A 2-story house with a wraparound porch, a barn weathered silver by sun and wind, corrals holding a handful of horses, and beyond them, cattle scattered across rolling pasture. It was modest, functional, built for endurance rather than beauty. Jacob pulled the wagon up to the house and climbed down, then reached for Noah. The boy went reluctantly, his eyes still fixed on Evelyn. "House hasn't had a woman's touch in some time," Jacob said, lifting her trunk as if it weighed nothing. "I've kept it clean, but it's plain." "Plain is fine." Inside, the house was exactly what he'd described, clean but stark, functional but lonely. The furniture was simple and well made, the floors swept, the windows letting in long rectangles of golden light. But there were gaps, absences that spoke louder than words. A rocking chair by the hearth with no cushion, a kitchen with no curtains, a sideboard with no photographs, no letters, no small personal touches that transform a house into a home. Jacob set her trunk down in a small room off the kitchen. This was the hired man's room before. "Well, it's yours now. There's a basin and pitcher, linens in the chest. Supper's at 6. "Thank you." He nodded and left, his boot steps heavy on the floorboards, Noah's lighter steps trailing behind. Evelyn stood alone in the small room, her reflection wavering in the mirror above the washstand. She looked like a ghost, pale, hollow-eyed, her traveling dress rumpled and dusty. Slowly she unpinned her hat, then her hair, letting it fall in dark waves around her shoulders. She poured water into the basin and washed her face, her hands, trying to scrub away the feeling of William Garrett's betrayal, the humiliation of standing abandoned on that platform. But shame doesn't wash off. It settles into your bones, becomes part of your marrow. She changed into a simpler dress, then ventured into the kitchen. It was clear Jacob had been managing on his own. The space was organized but impersonal, the cupboards holding only essentials. She found potatoes, onions, a haunch of salt pork, some flour and lard. Enough to make something decent. As she worked, her hands found their rhythm, the familiar comfort of peeling, chopping, measuring. Cooking had always steadied her, the alchemy of transforming raw ingredients into something nourishing and whole. She made biscuits and fried the salt pork with onions and potatoes, then set the table for 3. When Jacob and Noah returned from the evening chores, they both stopped in the doorway, staring at the set table, the steam rising from the plates. "Smells good," Jacob said quietly. Noah climbed into his chair without prompting, his eyes wide. "Like Mama used to make." Jacob's jaw tightened, but he didn't correct the boy. They ate in silence, the scrape of forks against plates the only sound. Evelyn noticed how carefully Jacob cut Noah's food, how he made sure the boy drank his milk, the tender attentiveness beneath his rough exterior. "This is fine cooking, Miss Carter," Jacob said finally. "Been a while since we had a proper meal. Please, call me Evelyn."
Evelyn, then. He met her eyes across the table. "We rise early here, 4:30. I'll need help with breakfast, packing lunches, keeping the house. If you're willing, there's mending needs doing, and Noah could use some schooling. His mother used to teach him letters and numbers, but I'm not much good at it." "I can do that." Noah looked up, hope blazing across his small face. "You'll teach me reading?" "If you'd like." "Mama was teaching me. She said I was real smart." Jacob's knuckles went white around his fork, but his voice remained steady. "You are smart, son. Your mama was right about that." After supper, while Jacob put Noah to bed, Evelyn washed the dishes and tidied the kitchen. She could hear them upstairs, Jacob's low rumble, Noah's higher voice, then silence. When Jacob came back down, his eyes were red-rimmed, his shoulders heavy. "He asks for her every night," he said, staring at the floor. "Wants to know when she's coming back. I keep telling him she's not, that she's in heaven, but he's 5. He doesn't understand forever." Evelyn dried her hands on a towel, choosing her words carefully. "Grief doesn't follow logic, especially for children." Jacob looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw the exhaustion carved into every line of his face. "His mother, Sarah, she died birthing our second child. Baby didn't make it either. One day we were a family, the next, I buried them both on a Tuesday. Noah won't go near their graves, won't talk about her except to ask when she's coming home." "I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate, but there was nothing else to offer. "Why'd you come west, Evelyn? Really?" She could have lied, could have dressed it up in prettier words. But this man had offered her shelter when she had nothing, and he deserved honesty. "Because I had no other choice. My father died 3 years ago, left debts I couldn't cover. I worked as a seamstress, but the pay was barely enough for rent. When I saw William's advertisement, a rancher seeking a wife, promising a home and partnership, it seemed like Providence. I know how foolish that sounds now. It doesn't sound foolish. It sounds desperate. There's a difference." She looked up, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. "We're all desperate in our own ways," Jacob continued. "That's why we end up in places like this, doing things we never imagined. The West doesn't draw dreamers so much as it draws people who've run out of other options." "Is that why you're here?" He smiled, but there was no humor in it. "I came here with Sarah 10 years ago. Her father owned this land, left it to her when he passed. We were going to build something, a real ranch, a legacy for our children. Now I'm just trying to keep Noah fed and the cattle from starving, some legacy." "You're doing more than that. You're raising a child on your own, keeping a ranch running, and you still had enough decency to help a stranger. That counts for something." Jacob's expression softened. "Maybe. Or maybe I just couldn't stomach the idea of another woman getting hurt by Victor Langdon's schemes." "You said he has a reputation. Has he done this before?" "At least 3 times that I know of. Brings women out, takes their money, then vanishes. Sometimes he marries them first so he can claim legal right to their property. Sometimes he just disappears. Either way, the women end up stranded with nothing. One of them died last winter, froze to death trying to walk back to town after he abandoned her 20 miles outside Cheyenne." Evelyn's blood turned cold. "And no one stops him?" "He's careful, uses different names, works different territories, never stays long enough for the law to catch up. And the women he targets? They're desperate, alone, ashamed. Most don't report it because they blame themselves for being foolish enough to trust him." "That's not foolishness. That's hope." Evelyn's voice came out harder than she intended. "And he exploits it." "Yes." Jacob's eyes met hers. "He does." They stood in the quiet kitchen, the lamplight casting long shadows across the walls. Outside, the night pressed against the windows, vast and dark, and full of sounds she didn't recognize. The distant howl of coyotes, the whisper of wind through grass, the creak of the house settling into itself. "You should get some rest," Jacob said finally. "Tomorrow starts early." Evelyn nodded and retreated to her small room. She lay in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of this unfamiliar place. Everything she'd known was gone. Her father, her home, the life she'd built in Boston. Even the future she'd imagined, fragile as it was, had been stolen before she could touch it. But as she lay there in the darkness, she thought about Noah's small arms around her waist, the word mama, whispered like a prayer. She thought about Jacob's careful tenderness with his son, the grief he carried like a stone in his chest. She thought about the meals she'd cooked, the table she'd set, the small act of creating order in a house haunted by absence. Maybe she'd been abandoned. Maybe she'd lost everything, but she wasn't dead. And tomorrow she would rise at 4:30 and prove that survival was its own kind of victory. The days fell into a rhythm so quickly it startled her. Evelyn rose before dawn, started the coffee, made breakfast while Jacob and Noah did the morning chores. After breakfast, she cleaned the kitchen, made the beds, swept the floors. Then she'd sit with Noah at the kitchen table, teaching him letters and numbers while Jacob worked the ranch. Noah was bright, eager, soaking up knowledge like parched earth soaks up rain. He'd trace letters in the flour she spread across the table, sounding out words with fierce concentration. When he got something right, his whole face would light up, and he'd look at her with such pure joy it made her chest ache. "Miss Evelyn, is this right? C-A-T? Cat." "Perfect, Noah. You're doing wonderfully." Mama would be proud, wouldn't she? Evelyn's throat tightened. Yes, sweetheart, she would be very proud. In the afternoons, she mended clothes, tended the vegetable garden Sarah had planted years ago, now overgrown but still producing. She found herself talking to the memory of the woman who'd lived here before her, wondering what Sarah had been like, what dreams she'd carried, what plans she'd made that would never come to fruition. Jacob kept his distance, polite but guarded. He thanked her for meals, acknowledged her work with curt nods, but never lingered in conversation. He was civil, respectful, and utterly closed off. She understood. To let her in would mean acknowledging that life continued, that the space Sarah left behind could be filled, and he wasn't ready for that. But Noah had no such reservations. He followed Evelyn everywhere, chattering about the ranch, the animals, his mother's favorite songs. He showed her the creek where Sarah used to take him fishing, the meadow where they'd picked wildflowers, the tree with their initials carved into the bark. "Papa won't come here anymore," Noah said, tracing the letters with his finger. "He says it makes him sad." "Everyone grieves differently, Noah. Your papa needs time." "Do you think Mama's watching us from heaven?" Evelyn chose her words carefully. "I think if there's any justice in the world, the people who loved us never truly leave. They stay in our hearts, in our memories, in the good things they taught us." Noah considered this, then slipped his hand into hers. "I'm glad you came, Miss Evelyn. Even if you're not my real mama, I'm glad you're here." She had to turn away so he wouldn't see her tears. 3 weeks passed, then 4. Evelyn stopped thinking of the arrangement as temporary and started noticing details, the way Jacob's hands gentled when he touched his son, the small kindnesses he showed the animals, the weight he carried in silence. She noticed how he'd stand on the porch at dusk, staring toward the graves on the hill, his shoulders bowed like he was carrying the world. One evening, she found him in the barn, forehead pressed against his horse's neck, shaking. "Jacob?" He straightened immediately, swiping at his eyes. "I'm fine." "You don't have to be." "Yes, I do. For Noah, he needs a father who's human, not one who's pretending nothing hurts." She stepped closer, her voice soft. "You don't have to carry this alone." "I've been carrying it alone for 6 months. Don't know any other way." "Then maybe it's time to learn." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw the moment his defenses cracked. "I don't know how to do this, any of this. I'm failing him, Evelyn. He cries for his mother every night, and I can't give her back to him. I can't fix it. I can't make it better. I'm just here, breathing, barely." "That's enough. Breathing is enough. Everything else comes after." Jacob's laugh was broken, bitter. "You sound like Sarah." Then she was wise. They stood in the barn's dusty light, the smell of hay and horses thick around them. Evelyn didn't reach for him, didn't offer empty comfort. She just stood there, present, witness to his pain. "Thank you," he said finally, "for staying, for helping with Noah, for being here."
I have nowhere else to be. That's not true anymore. You could leave, find work in town, start over. Is that what you want? No. The word came fast, sharp, surprising them both. No, I don't want you to leave. Something shifted in the air between them, delicate and dangerous. Evelyn felt it like static before a storm, the way the world holds its breath before lightning strikes. Then I'll stay, she said, as long as you'll have me. Jacob nodded, not trusting himself to speak. That night, over supper, Noah looked between them with an expression far too knowing for a 5-year-old. Papa, are you and Miss Evelyn going to get married? Jacob choked on his coffee. Evelyn's fork clattered against her plate. Noah, we're not. Jacob fumbled for words. Why not? You like her. I like her. Mama would like her too. She always said we should help people who need help, and Miss Evelyn needed help. Now she's helping us. That's what families do. It's more complicated than that, son. Why? It was a fair question, really. Out of the mouths of babes came the kind of logic that shattered adult pretense. Evelyn found her voice. Your father and I are friends, Noah. Good friends. But marriage is different. Mama and Papa were friends, she told me. She said the best marriages start with friendship. Jacob's eyes were distant, lost in memory. She did say that. The conversation ended there, but the question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to dispel. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Evelyn let herself imagine it, not out of romance, but out of brutal practicality. She had no money, no prospects, nowhere to go. Jacob had a child who needed mothering, and a ranch that needed a woman's hand. It would be a partnership, nothing more, a business arrangement dressed up in vows. But even as she thought it, she knew that was a lie. Because when she closed her eyes, she saw Jacob's face in the barn, saw the raw humanity beneath his grief. She saw Noah's bright eyes and heard his laughter. She felt the satisfaction of a day's work, the pleasure of sitting on the porch as the sun set, watching the land turn gold. She was building something here. Not the life she'd planned, but a life nonetheless. And she wasn't ready to give that up. 2 more weeks passed in quiet routine. Evelyn had just finished hanging laundry when she heard hoofbeats approaching fast. She turned to see a rider coming hard up the road, dust rising in plumes behind him. Jacob emerged from the barn, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle propped by the door. The rider pulled up short, a young man, barely 20, his face flushed with urgency. Mr. Hale, there's trouble in town. Victor Langdon's back and he's asking about a woman named Evelyn Carter. Says she's his intended bride, that she ran off with his money. Sheriff wants to talk to her. Evelyn's world tilted. She gripped the porch railing, her knuckles white. Jacob's expression went cold and hard as winter stone. You tell the sheriff Evelyn Carter is under my protection and has been since the day she arrived. If Victor Langdon wants to press charges, he can answer some questions of his own, starting with why he abandoned her at the train station and what he did with the money she sent ahead. The young man nodded. Yes, sir. But Mr. Hale, he's got papers, a contract, says she owes him for the train fare and breach of promise. Those papers are worth less than the lies they're printed on. Maybe so, but the sheriff says you should bring her in. Let it get sorted legal-like. Jacob turned to Evelyn, his eyes blazing. Pack a bag. We're going to town, and we're ending this. The ride into town felt longer than the hour it took. Evelyn sat rigid in the wagon beside Jacob, her hands twisted in her lap, while Noah pressed against her side, sensing the tension crackling through the air like heat lightning. Jacob's jaw was set, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, and he hadn't spoken since they'd left the ranch except to tell Noah to stay close once they reached town. The main street of Cedar Ridge was wider than Evelyn remembered, lined with false-fronted buildings that seemed to lean toward one another like gossips sharing secrets. Horses stood hitched outside the saloon, their tails swishing at flies. A few women in bonnets paused their shopping to stare as the wagon rolled past, their eyes sharp with curiosity. Jacob pulled up in front of the sheriff's office, a squat building with barred windows and a hitching post worn smooth by years of use. He climbed down and reached for Noah, but the boy clung to Evelyn's hand. I want to stay with Miss Evelyn. Noah, let him come, Evelyn said quietly.
He'll be frightened alone. Jacob's mouth tightened, but he nodded. They walked into the sheriff's office together, Noah's small hand gripping Evelyn's with desperate strength. The sheriff was a heavy-set man with a graying mustache and eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. He stood when they entered, his gaze moving from Jacob to Evelyn with careful assessment. "Mr. Hale, Miss Carter, I presume?" "Yes." Evelyn's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm Sheriff Tom Brennan. I appreciate you coming in. We've got ourselves a situation here that needs sorting." He gestured toward the door leading to the back cells. "Victor Langdon's made some serious accusations. Says you stole $300 from him and ran off to avoid marriage." "That's a lie." The words burst from Evelyn before she could stop them. "He's the thief. I sent him $215 to help establish our household, and he abandoned me at the train station. I've never seen him in my life except in a photograph he sent with his letters." "She's been at my ranch since the day she arrived," Jacob added, his voice like iron, "earning her keep honestly. Whatever Victor Langdon claims, he's the one who committed fraud." Sheriff Brennan pulled out a chair. "Why don't we all sit down and go through this proper-like? Miss Carter, you start from the beginning." Evelyn sat, her spine straight despite the trembling in her hands. Noah climbed into her lap without asking, his weight a small comfort. She told the story exactly as it happened. The advertisement she'd seen in the Boston newspaper, the letters from William Garrett describing his ranch and his desire for a wife to help build a future, the money she'd sent at his request, the train ticket she'd purchased, the empty platform where he'd promised to meet her. "Do you have the letters?" Sheriff Brennan asked. "Yes, in my trunk at Mr. Hale's ranch." "And the receipts for the money you sent?" "I have the bank draft receipt showing I sent $215 to William Garrett in care of the Cedar Ridge post office." The sheriff made notes, his expression unreadable. "And you say you'd never met this man before you arrived?" "Never. Everything was arranged through correspondence." "Did he make any promises in writing? Marriage, property, that sort of thing?" "Yes. He promised marriage within a week of my arrival and said we'd run the ranch together as equal partners. He said he'd already prepared the marriage license and secured the preacher." Sheriff Brennan's eyebrows rose. "That right? And when you got here and he wasn't at the station, what did you do?" "I stood there until the platform cleared, trying to figure out what to do. That's when Noah ran up to me, and Mr. Hale explained who William Garrett really was." "Victor Langdon," Jacob said flatly. "I've known him for 3 years. He worked on ranches around here under various names, always leaving sudden-like when money went missing or women came looking for him. Last I heard, he'd moved on to Denver. Didn't expect him to show his face here again." The sheriff leaned back in his chair, studying them both. "Here's where it gets complicated. Victor's got papers too. A contract signed by both of you agreeing to marriage, with a clause saying if you breach the agreement, you owe him restitution for expenses incurred. He's claiming you got cold feet when you saw the ranch wasn't as grand as you expected and ran off to find a richer man." Evelyn's face burned. "I never signed any contract. I never even met him to sign anything." "This signature here looks mighty official." The sheriff pushed a document across the desk. Evelyn stared at it. The handwriting was similar to hers, the same loops and curves she'd practiced in finishing school, but the tremor in the downstrokes was wrong, and the capital E had a flourish she never used. "That's not my signature. It's a forgery." "You able to prove that?" "I can show you my real handwriting. The letters I sent him, my teaching notes for Noah, anything you want." "I'll need to see those letters, both the ones you sent and the ones he sent you." Sheriff Brennan stood. "Miss Carter, I'm going to bring Victor in here so he can state his case. Mr. Hale, I'd appreciate it if you'd step outside with the boy. This might get heated." "I'm not leaving her alone with that bastard." Jacob's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. "I'm the law here, Mr. Hale, and I'll keep order. But if you stay, you keep your temper. Understood?" Jacob's eyes met Evelyn's, asking a silent question. She nodded slightly. He stepped back but positioned himself by the door, his arms crossed, his whole body radiating threat. Sheriff Brennan disappeared into the back and returned with a man who made Evelyn's stomach turn. Victor Langdon was handsome in a slick, calculated way. Dark hair, pomaded back, a suit that was too fine for ranch country, eyes that assessed her like she was livestock at auction. He smiled when he saw her,
showing white teeth. Evelyn, darling, I'm so relieved you're safe. When you disappeared, I feared the worst. The endearment made her skin crawl. Don't call me that. You abandoned me. Is that what he told you? Victor's voice dripped sympathy as he gestured toward Jacob. My dear, I was delayed by business in Cheyenne. When I arrived at the station 3 hours late, you were gone. I've been searching for you ever since, worried sick. And then I hear you've been living at another man's ranch? Can you imagine how that looks? You're a liar. Evelyn's voice shook with rage. You were never coming. You took my money and disappeared, just like you've done to other women. Victor's expression hardened for just a moment before the mask slipped back into place. I don't know what stories you've been told, but I assure you I had every intention of fulfilling our agreement. I have the marriage license right here, dated for 3 days after your scheduled arrival. I have the contract we both signed. I have receipts showing I spent considerable money preparing for your arrival, furniture, household goods, all purchased in anticipation of our life together. He spread papers across the sheriff's desk with a magician's flourish. Evelyn stared at them, her mind reeling. They looked official. Stamps, signatures, dates that aligned with his story, the forged contract with her name, a marriage license application, receipts from merchants in Cheyenne. Sheriff, I came here in good faith, Victor continued, his voice reasonable, wounded. I courted this woman honorably, made her an honest proposal, and she agreed. Now I find her living with another man, my money spent, my reputation damaged. I'm not asking for anything unreasonable. I just want what's owed to me. Either she honors our agreement and becomes my wife, or she repays the money I invested in good faith. $300 is what you're claiming? Sheriff Brennan asked. $215 she sent, plus $85 I spent on preparations. I have the receipts. Evelyn felt the trap closing around her. She had $17 left in the world. Even if the sheriff believed her, even if he dismissed Victor's claims, she had no way to pay him back. And without money, she had no way to leave Cedar Ridge, no way to start over somewhere else. I'd like to see those letters Miss Carter mentioned, the sheriff said. The ones that started this whole arrangement. Of course. Victor pulled a bundle from his coat pocket. I kept every one. You can see how eager she was to marry me, how she agreed to all my terms. Evelyn's hands trembled as she took the letters. They were hers. She recognized her own handwriting, her own words. But as she read them, she felt sick. Phrases had been taken out of context, sentences rearranged. Where she'd written, I hope we can build a partnership based on mutual respect, he'd somehow made it read like desperate eagerness. Where she'd written, I'm willing to work hard to establish our household, it sounded like she was offering servitude. These aren't complete, she said. He's cut them up, rearranged them. Where I asked questions about the ranch, the arrangements, whether we'd have time to know each other before marriage, all of that is missing. Do you have copies? No? Who keeps copies of personal letters? Victor spread his hands in a gesture of reasonableness. Sheriff, I think it's clear what happened here. Miss Carter arrived, met Mr. Hale, a man with better prospects than a simple rancher like myself, and decided to trade up. I bear her no ill will, truly, but I do expect restitution for the financial loss and the damage to my reputation. You son of a... Jacob started forward, but the sheriff held up a hand. Mr. Hale, I warned you. He's lying, Tom. You know his reputation. How many other women has he pulled this scheme on? Rumors aren't evidence, Sheriff Brennan said, though his eyes were troubled. And right now, he's got papers, and she's got accusations. I can provide witnesses, Evelyn said desperately. In Boston, people who knew me, who can verify my character. Boston's 2,000 miles away, Victor interrupted smoothly. By the time we sent letters and waited for responses, months would pass. Surely we can settle this more efficiently. The sheriff rubbed his jaw, thinking. Miss Carter, you got any proof at all that this man wasn't at the station when you arrived? Anyone who saw you waiting alone? There were people on the platform, but I don't know their names. I was watching for William, for him, and he never appeared. I was delayed, Victor said again, patience edging toward irritation. 3 hours delayed. Surely someone remembers seeing me arrive, frantic, searching for my bride? I can ask around, the sheriff said.
Noah, who'd been silent in Evelyn's lap, suddenly spoke up. He's a bad man. Miss Evelyn doesn't lie. She teaches me reading and makes Papa smile again. We want her to stay. Victor's mask slipped again, annoyance flashing across his features. How touching. You've already installed her as a replacement mother. Tell me, Mr. Hale, what exactly is the nature of your relationship with my intended bride? Watch your mouth, Jacob growled. It's a fair question. She's been living under your roof, unchaperoned, for what, 6 weeks now? And you expect people to believe nothing improper has occurred? The insinuation hung in the air like poison. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. She understood then what Victor was really doing. If he couldn't force her to marry him, he'd destroy her reputation so thoroughly she'd have no choice but to accept his terms or leave town in disgrace. Miss Carter has been earning her keep as household help, Jacob said, each word bitten off sharp. Nothing more. Of course. Victor's smile was cruel. Though I imagine the good people of Cedar Ridge might wonder why a respectable rancher would take in a strange woman, provide her room and board, and expect nothing in return, especially a grieving widower with certain needs. Jacob's fist connected with Victor's jaw before anyone could stop him. Victor stumbled back, blood spraying from his split lip, and then everything erupted into chaos. The sheriff shouted, men rushed in from outside, and Noah started crying in Evelyn's arms. That's enough! Sheriff Brennan hauled Jacob back. I could arrest you for assault, Hale. Then arrest me. But don't stand there and let him slander a decent woman. Victor dabbed at his bloody lip with a handkerchief, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. You see, Sheriff? The man's violent, unstable, and you're leaving an innocent woman in his care? Innocent? Evelyn's voice cut through the commotion. She stood, settling Noah on the chair, and faced Victor with every ounce of courage she could muster. You're a fraud and a predator. You lure desperate women west with promises you never intend to keep, you steal their money, and you abandon them to suffer the consequences. I don't care what papers you've forged or what lies you've told. I will not marry you. I will not give you another cent, and I will not let you destroy my life just because your scheme didn't work this time. The room went silent. Victor's expression turned ugly. Careful, Miss Carter. You're making serious accusations against an upstanding businessman. Then let's test them. Sheriff, send a telegram to the authorities in Cheyenne, Denver, Colorado Springs. Ask if they have any complaints against a man matching his description using various names. Ask the postmaster here if William Garrett received any other money orders in the last year. Check the records. Sheriff Brennan's eyes sharpened. That's not a bad idea. She's grasping at straws, Victor said, but there was tension in his voice now. This is absurd. I have legal documents. I want what I'm owed. And you'll get a legal hearing, the sheriff said. But it won't be today. I'm going to investigate Miss Carter's claims, verify these papers of yours, and talk to some folks who might remember seeing you at the station or not seeing you. Until then, nobody's paying anybody anything, and nobody's getting married. How long will this take? Long as it takes. Could be a week, could be a month. Victor's composure cracked. A month? I have business to attend to. I can't sit around this backwater town for a month. Then you should have thought of that before you started making legal claims, Sheriff Brennan said mildly. You're free to leave any time, but if you do, I'll assume you're withdrawing your complaint. Victor's jaw worked. Fine, 1 week, but I expect this resolved in my favor, or I'll take this to a territorial judge. You do what you need to do. Miss Carter, Mr. Hale, you're free to go. I'll be in touch as I learn more. Jacob took Noah's hand and ushered Evelyn toward the door. As they passed Victor, he leaned close enough that only she could hear. You think you've won? You have nothing, Evelyn. No money, no prospects, nowhere to go. You'll come crawling back to me, or you'll end up in the gutter where you belong. She met his eyes and saw the truth there. He didn't care about the money or the marriage. He cared about winning, about breaking her, about proving he could destroy anyone who defied him. I'd rather starve, she said quietly. Outside, the afternoon sun felt too bright, the air too thin. Evelyn's legs trembled as Jacob helped her into the wagon. Noah climbed up beside her, his small face pinched with worry. Is the bad man going to take you away? No, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere. But even as she said it, she wondered if she was lying. Because Victor was right about one thing: she had nothing. And if the sheriff ruled in his favor, she'd have even less. They rode back toward the ranch in heavy silence. Halfway there, Jacob pulled the wagon off the road near a stand of cottonwoods and stopped. "Noah, go see if you can find any good skipping stones by the creek. Stay where I can see you." The boy scrambled down, clearly eager to escape the tension. Once he was out of earshot, Jacob turned to Evelyn. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have hit him. I made things worse." "You defended me. That's not something to apologize for." "He's going to use it against us. Paint me as violent. You as a woman of questionable morals. In a week, when the sheriff hasn't found enough evidence to dismiss his claim, you'll be forced to either marry him or pay him back. And we both know you can't pay." Evelyn stared at the mountains in the distance, their peaks sharp against the sky. "So what do I do?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "You marry me instead." She turned to stare at him. "What?" "Marry me. Tonight, tomorrow, soon as we can arrange it. If you're my wife, Victor's claim is void. The contract becomes meaningless. You'd be legally protected." "Jacob, you can't." "I'm not asking because I want to trap you," he said quickly. "I'm asking because it's the only way I can think of to keep you safe. It would be a business arrangement, nothing more. You'd have legal protection, a home, security. In return, you'd keep doing what you're already doing, helping with Noah, managing the household. We'd be partners, like you wanted with William Garrett, except honest." Evelyn's mind spun. It was insane. It was practical. It was terrifying. It was the most generous offer anyone had ever made her. "What about Sarah? You're still grieving. You said yourself you're barely keeping your head above water. Adding a wife—" "You've been my wife in everything but name for 6 weeks now," Jacob said. "You've brought life back to that house." Noah smiles again. "I can sleep sometimes without hearing him cry through the walls. You've given us both something to hold on to. I'm not offering you romance, Evelyn. I'm offering you survival. And maybe that's all either of us can manage right now." "People will talk." "Let them. They're already talking." She thought about Victor's sneering insinuations, the weight of judgment she'd felt in the sheriff's office, the way decent women had clutched their skirts aside when she'd walked past in Boston after her father died in debt. Reputation was a luxury she'd lost long ago. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "it would have to be real, legally binding. I won't enter a false marriage that you can dissolve when it becomes inconvenient. I wouldn't ask you to. When I make a vow, I keep it. And if someday you meet someone you actually want to marry, someone you love—" Jacob's laugh was bitter. "I had that. I buried it. I'm not looking for it again." It should have hurt, that flat declaration. But somehow it was a comfort. No false promises, no pretense of feelings that didn't exist, just honesty, raw and unvarnished. "Give me tonight to think about it," Evelyn said. "Take all the time you need. But Evelyn, whatever you decide, you're not going back to him. I'll find another way if this doesn't suit you." She believed him. This hard, grieving man with his careful hands and his broken heart, he'd find a way to protect her even if it cost him everything. And that was more than anyone else had ever offered. That night, after Noah was asleep, Evelyn sat on the porch watching the stars emerge like pinpricks in dark cloth. Jacob joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee, and they sat in silence for a while. "Tell me about Sarah," Evelyn said finally. Jacob's hands tightened around his cup. "Why?" "Because if I'm going to take her place in name, I should know who she was, what she meant to you." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, slowly, the words came. "She was strong, not loud about it, just steady, like bedrock. Her father died when she was 16, left her this ranch, and she ran it herself for 4 years before I showed up looking for work. I thought she'd be some helpless girl needing rescue. Instead, she hired me, outworked me, and told me I was an idiot when I suggested something stupid." He smiled, the expression painful. "Took me a year to work up the courage to ask if she'd consider marrying me. She said yes before I finished the question, said she'd been waiting for me to catch up." "She sounds remarkable." "She was. She made me want to be better than I was. Made me believe I could build something that mattered." His voice cracked.
Then she died trying to give me a second child, and I couldn't save her. Couldn't do a damn thing but watch her slip away. Evelyn set down her cup and did something that surprised them both. She reached over and took his hand. His fingers were rough, calloused, warm. I can't replace her, Jacob. I won't even try. But I can stand beside you, help you raise Noah, keep this ranch running, and maybe that's enough. He looked at their joined hands, then at her face. It's more than enough. It's everything. Then yes, I'll marry you. The words hung in the night air, binding as any vow. Jacob's grip tightened on her hand, and for a moment she thought she saw tears in his eyes. Tomorrow, he said, we'll ride into town tomorrow and find the preacher. Before Victor can scheme up something new, before the sheriff makes his ruling, we'll make it legal. Tomorrow, Evelyn agreed. Neither of them moved to go inside. They sat there under the stars, hands clasped, two people who'd lost everything finding something like hope in the ruins. Dawn came too quickly. Evelyn woke to the sound of Jacob moving through the house, the familiar rhythm of coffee being ground, the stove door creaking open. She dressed carefully in her best remaining dress, a simple gray wool that she'd brushed and pressed the night before. Her hands trembled as she pinned up her hair, and she had to start over twice before the pins would hold. When she emerged from her room, Jacob was standing at the stove in his Sunday clothes. Dark trousers, a white shirt she'd starched and ironed just days ago, a vest that stretched across his broad shoulders. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, and something flickered in his eyes. Coffee's ready. Thank you. They moved around each other with careful politeness, the weight of what they were about to do pressing down like a physical thing. Noah appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and stopped short when he saw them both dressed up. Where are we going? Jacob knelt down to his son's level. We're going into town. Miss Evelyn and I are getting married today. Noah's face transformed, sleep vanishing in an instant. Really? You mean it? Miss Evelyn's going to be my mama? If she's willing, Jacob said, glancing at Evelyn. She came and knelt beside them, taking Noah's small hands in hers. I'm willing, sweetheart. But you need to understand something. I'm not replacing your real mama. No one could ever do that. She'll always be your mama, always be in your heart. I'm going to be here, for as long as you'll have me. Noah threw his arms around her neck so suddenly she almost lost her balance. I'll have you forever and ever. Over the boy's shoulder, she met Jacob's eyes and saw the same desperate hope she felt burning in her own chest. They were building something fragile here, something that could shatter with a single wrong word or misstep. But it was real, and it was theirs, and it was worth fighting for. The ride into town felt different this time. The morning sun painted everything gold, and the mountain seemed closer, more protective than threatening. Noah chattered the whole way, asking questions about the wedding, whether there would be cake, if he could wear his good shoes, oblivious to the tension coiling tighter with every mile. Cedar Ridge was already awake when they arrived, the streets busy with wagons and horses, people moving between shops with purpose. Jacob pulled up in front of a small white church with a steeple that reached toward the endless sky. The preacher, a thin man with kind eyes and silver hair, was sweeping the steps. Reverend Walsh, Jacob called. Got a moment? The preacher set aside his broom. Jacob Hale. It's been some time since I've seen you at services. What can I do for you? This is Evelyn Carter. We'd like to be married. Today, if possible. Reverend Walsh's eyebrows rose, but his expression remained carefully neutral. That's quite sudden. Have you considered the implications? The community will talk, especially given recent events. Let them talk, Jacob said flatly. We're here in good faith, asking for a legal Christian marriage. Will you perform the ceremony or not? The preacher studied them both, his gaze lingering on Evelyn. Miss Carter, are you entering this marriage of your own free will? You're not being coerced or forced in any way? No, Reverend. This is my choice. And you understand the sacred nature of these vows? That marriage is meant to be permanent, binding before man in heaven? I do. He looked at Jacob. You're still grieving Sarah. Everyone knows that. Are you certain you're ready for this? Sarah's gone, Jacob said, and the words came out rough but steady. She's been gone 6 months, and Noah needs a mother,
and this ranch needs a woman's hand. Evelyn and I have come to an understanding that suits us both. I'm asking you to bless it." Reverend Walsh was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. "Come inside. We'll need witnesses." The church was cool and dim, smelling of old wood and candle wax. The preacher sent his wife to fetch 2 neighbors who could serve as witnesses, and while they waited, Evelyn stood at the altar looking up at the simple cross mounted on the wall. She thought about her father, who'd wanted grandchildren and a good marriage for her. She thought about the life she'd imagined in Boston, the respectable match she'd once hoped for. All of it was ashes now, but somehow standing here in this rough frontier church felt more real than any of those polished dreams. The witnesses arrived, a severe-looking woman in black and a rancher Jacob knew slightly. They took their positions with expressions that ranged from curious to disapproving. Reverend Walsh opened his Bible, and the ceremony began. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of heaven to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The words washed over Evelyn like water. She heard herself repeating vows, heard Jacob's deeper voice echoing hers. His hand was warm and steady when he slipped a plain gold band on her finger, Sarah's ring, she realized with a jolt, and had to force herself not to pull away. This was practical, she reminded herself. Survival, not sentiment. "I now pronounce you man and wife. What heaven has joined, let no man tear asunder." Jacob kissed her cheek, brief and formal, and it was done. She was married to a man she'd known for 6 weeks, wearing a dead woman's ring, with witnesses who looked at her like she'd committed some elaborate fraud. They signed the marriage certificate. Reverend Walsh handed it to Jacob with a grave expression. "May heaven bless this union and grant you both wisdom and patience." "Thank you, Reverend." Outside, Noah was waiting on the church steps, and when they emerged, he launched himself at Evelyn. "Are you really my mama now?" "Really and truly." "Can I call you Mama instead of Miss Evelyn?" Evelyn looked at Jacob, who nodded slightly. "If you'd like to." "Mama," Noah tested the word, grinning. "Mama, Mama, Mama, can we get cake now?" "Let's see what the bakery has," Jacob said, and there was something almost soft in his voice. They walked down the main street as a family, and Evelyn felt the stairs following them like shadows. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Men watched with expressions ranging from sympathy to suspicion. Word would spread fast, the mail-order bride who'd caught herself a widower, the indecent haste, the scandal of it all. At the bakery, Noah pressed his face against the glass case, oohing over the cakes and pastries. Jacob ordered a small cake with white frosting, and the baker, a plump woman with flour in her hair, congratulated them with strained politeness. They were leaving the shop when a voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "Well, well, isn't this touching?" Victor Langdon stood across the street, his arms crossed, his expression a mixture of fury and cold calculation. He started toward them, and Jacob immediately positioned himself between Victor and Evelyn. "Stay back, Langdon. I heard a rumor this morning that sounded too absurd to be true, but here you are, playing happy family. Tell me, when exactly did you decide to marry my intended bride? Before or after you took her into your bed?" "Watch your mouth," Jacob growled. "Oh, I think we're past politeness, don't you? You've stolen what was mine, Hale. We had a legal contract." "Had," Evelyn said, stepping forward despite Jacob's attempt to shield her. "Past tense. That contract was for a marriage between Evelyn Carter and William Garrett. I'm Evelyn Hale now. Your claim is void." Victor's smile was vicious. "You think it's that simple? You think you can just marry another man and all your obligations disappear?" "That's exactly what I think. And if you disagree, take it up with a judge." "Oh, I will. I'll take this to the territorial court. I'll sue you both for conspiracy to defraud, breach of contract, theft. By the time I'm done, you'll lose that ranch, Hale. Everything you've built, gone to pay what she owes me." "You're bluffing," Jacob said, but there was uncertainty beneath the bravado. "Am I? Ask your lawyer what happens when someone deliberately interferes with a legal contract. Ask him about punitive damages." Victor's eyes glittered with malice. "You thought you were so clever, rushing off to get married before I could stop you. But all you've done is dig yourselves deeper. Now you're both liable."
Noah had started crying, clutching Evelyn's skirt. People had gathered, drawn by the raised voices, creating an audience for this public humiliation. Evelyn felt her face burning, but she refused to look down, refused to give Victor the satisfaction of seeing her cower. "Do whatever you want," she said clearly. "Sue us, drag us to court, spread your lies, but I will never be your wife, and I will never give you another cent. You're a predator and a fraud, and eventually, everyone will see it." Brave words from a woman with no money and no options. "How long do you think Hale will keep you when you've cost him everything?" Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice so only they could hear. "I could have given you an easy life, Evelyn. All you had to do was be obedient, know your place. Instead, you chose this: poverty, struggle, a man who doesn't even love you. When winter comes and the money runs out and that ranch fails, you'll wish you'd been smarter. I'd rather freeze to death than spend one day as your wife." Victor's mask of civility cracked completely. "You sanctimonious little whore! You think you're better than me? You're nothing, a desperate old maid who threw herself at the first man stupid enough to take pity on her. You're not a wife, you're a burden, and you'll destroy him just like you destroyed everyone else who was foolish enough to care about you." Jacob moved so fast Evelyn didn't see it coming. His fist caught Victor square in the mouth, sending him sprawling into the dirt. Blood poured from Victor's split lip, and when he looked up, there was something feral in his eyes. "You'll pay for that," he hissed. "Assault, in front of witnesses. The sheriff will hear that you were harassing my wife and making threats," Jacob said coldly. "And every person here saw you throw the first insult. You want to press charges, go ahead, but it'll just give me another chance to tell everyone exactly what kind of man you are." Victor climbed to his feet, dabbing at his bloody mouth. His eyes swept the crowd, calculating, and Evelyn saw him adjust his strategy in real time. "Fine," he said, his voice carrying to the gathered onlookers. "I'll let the law handle this. But mark my words, this isn't over, not by a long shot." He stalked off toward the sheriff's office, leaving Jacob and Evelyn standing in the middle of the street with Noah sobbing between them and half the town watching like it was a theater performance. Reverend Walsh materialized at Jacob's elbow. "You better come with me, both of you, before this gets worse." They followed him back to the church, Noah still crying, the cake forgotten in its box. In the Reverend's small office, Evelyn collapsed into a chair while Jacob paced like a caged animal. "That was foolish, Jacob," Reverend Walsh said quietly. "Hitting him in public with witnesses. He called my wife a whore. What was I supposed to do?" "Walk away. Let his words expose him for what he is instead of proving his point about your temper." The preacher turned to Evelyn. "Mrs. Hale, I need you to be honest with me. Is there any truth to his claims? Did you sign a contract with him?" "He forged my signature. I have proof. The letters I sent him, my actual handwriting. Sheriff Brennan was supposed to investigate." "And the money? Did you send him funds?" $215, yes. He requested it to help establish our household before I arrived. I was a fool to trust him." "Trust isn't foolishness, though it can be misplaced." Reverend Walsh steepled his fingers. "Here's what concerns me. Even if the contract is fraudulent, even if Victor Langdon is everything you say he is, he's got enough documentation to make your lives very difficult. Courts don't move quickly out here, and in the meantime, you'll be living under a cloud of suspicion. Your marriage will be questioned. Your reputations will suffer." "They're already suffering," Evelyn said bitterly. "True, but it can get worse, much worse." He paused. "There's also the question of what happens if he actually takes this to court and wins. I'm not a lawyer, but I've seen cases where judges ruled that a subsequent marriage doesn't void a prior contract if there's evidence of conspiracy. If they decide you two married specifically to avoid his legal claim, they could annul your marriage and rule in his favor." The words hit like physical blows. Evelyn's vision swam. "They could annul it? It's possible, especially if he can prove you married purely to escape your obligations to him." Jacob stopped pacing. "So what are you saying? We should just give up? Let him win?" "No, I'm saying you need to be prepared for a fight that could last months and cost you everything. And you need to decide if you're willing to pay that price." Evelyn looked at Jacob, saw the exhaustion and fury and fear warring in his expression.
This wasn't what he'd signed up for. He'd offered her protection, not a lawsuit that could destroy him. She couldn't ask him to sacrifice everything for her sake. "Jacob," she said quietly, "if you want to end this, if you want to annul the marriage yourself before it costs you the ranch, I'll understand. You didn't bargain for this kind of trouble." He stared at her like she'd slapped him. "You think I'd do that? Just throw you to the wolves because things got hard? I think you have Noah to consider. If Victor can really take the ranch, your son will suffer. I can't be responsible for that." "You're not responsible for Victor Langdon's crimes." Jacob crossed to her chair and knelt down so they were eye level. "Listen to me. I made vows today. I don't make promises I don't intend to keep. We're in this together now, for better or worse. And if that bastard wants to take everything I have, he'll have to go through both of us to get it. But the ranch is just land and buildings. My son is what matters, and he needs you, Evelyn. I need you, not as hired help or a business arrangement, but as," he struggled for words, "as someone who stands with us, who fights for us. That's worth more than any ranch." Evelyn felt tears burning in her eyes. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you're brave and stubborn and kind. I know you make Noah laugh, and you've brought life back to a house that felt like a tomb. I know you could have run when Victor showed up, could have tried to bargain with him, could have saved yourself. But you chose to stay. That tells me everything I need to know." Reverend Walsh cleared his throat. "This is all very moving, but you still need a plan. Victor will go to the sheriff, possibly file charges for assault. He'll push for a court date. You need legal representation." "I can't afford a lawyer," Jacob said. "There's a young attorney in town, fresh from Denver, looking to build his practice. Name's Martin Brennan, the sheriff's nephew, actually. He might take your case for a reduced fee, especially if you can prove Victor's been running this scheme on other women." "How do we prove that?" "Telegrams to other towns, checking with postmasters for money orders sent to his various aliases, finding other victims willing to testify." The Reverend pulled out paper and began making notes. "It won't be easy, and it won't be quick. But if you can establish a pattern of fraud, you might be able to turn this around." Jacob stood. "Then that's what we do. Whatever it takes." "One more thing," Reverend Walsh said. "This marriage of yours. Make it real." Evelyn's face flamed. "Reverend, I don't mean in the bedroom, though that's your business. I mean in the eyes of the community. Live as husband and wife, openly and honestly. Attend church together, be seen in town, let people witness that this is a genuine partnership, not a scheme to avoid legal consequences. The more authentic your marriage appears, the harder it will be for Victor to claim it's fraudulent." "We can do that," Jacob said. They collected Noah, who'd fallen asleep in a pew, and carried him back to the wagon. The ride home was quiet, each of them lost in thought. The mountains loomed larger now, shadows creeping across the valley as the sun climbed higher. Evelyn watched the landscape roll past and thought about the irony of it all. She'd come west looking for safety and stability, and instead, she'd landed in the middle of a battle that could cost her everything. But she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She was angry. Back at the ranch, Jacob unhitched the horses while Evelyn carried Noah inside and put him down for a proper nap. When she came back out, Jacob was standing by the corral, staring at nothing. "We should make a list," she said, "of everything we know about Victor, every detail that might help prove he's done this before." Jacob turned to look at her. "You're not backing down, are you?" "No." "Are you?" "Not a chance in hell." They went inside and spread papers across the kitchen table, the letters Victor had sent under the name William Garrett, the advertisements Evelyn had responded to, the bank draft receipt. They wrote down dates, places, the names of towns Victor had mentioned in his correspondence. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "We need to talk to Sheriff Brennan," Evelyn said. "Find out if he's made any progress investigating Victor's background. And we need to visit this lawyer nephew of his, see if he'll take the case. Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow." They worked until the light faded and Evelyn had to start supper. Noah woke and joined them at the table, still groggy but happy, chattering about how he was going to tell everyone at church that Miss Evelyn was his mama now. His innocence was a sharp contrast to the battle they were preparing for, a reminder of what they were fighting to protect. After supper, after Noah was in bed,
Evelyn and Jacob sat on the porch again. The stars were emerging, brilliant and cold, and the night air carried the scent of sage and distant rain. "I'm sorry," Jacob said suddenly, "for dragging you into this mess. You came here looking for a fresh start, and instead—" "Stop," Evelyn interrupted. "I'm not sorry. Scared, yes. Angry, absolutely, but not sorry. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm fighting for something that matters instead of just surviving. That's worth the risk. Even if we lose everything? Even then. Because we'll lose it fighting, not because we gave up." Jacob reached over and took her hand, the same way he had the night before. "You're something else, Evelyn Hale." The name still sounded strange to her ears, but she was starting to like it. Evelyn Hale. Wife, mother, fighter. Not the desperate old maid Victor had sneered about, not the abandoned bride who'd stood lost on the platform. Someone new. Someone stronger. "So are you, Jacob Hale." They sat in the darkness, hands clasped, drawing strength from each other. Tomorrow they'd ride back into town and face whatever Victor had set in motion. They'd find the lawyer, build their case, prepare for war. But tonight, they had this. The quiet ranch, the sleeping child, the fragile alliance between two people who'd been broken by life and were slowly learning to be whole again. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human struggle. But down here on Earth, two people held on to each other and refused to let go. And that was its own kind of defiance, its own small rebellion against a world that had tried to grind them both to dust. Inside the house, Noah stirred in his sleep and called out for his mama. Evelyn rose to go to him, but Jacob stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "Let me. You've done enough for today." She listened to his footsteps on the stairs, his low voice murmuring comfort, and felt something shift in her chest. This was what marriage meant, she realized. Not grand gestures or romantic declarations, but this, the quiet sharing of burdens, the willingness to stand together when everything else fell apart. When Jacob came back down, he found her still on the porch, and without a word he sat beside her again. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with understanding rather than awkwardness. And when they finally went inside to their separate rooms, Evelyn lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking about the day she'd just lived through. She'd gotten married. She'd become a mother. She'd made an enemy who wanted to destroy her. But she'd also found something she hadn't expected, a reason to fight, a family worth protecting, and a man who saw her not as a burden or a convenience, but as an equal, a partner. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. Victor would make his moves, and they'd have to counter every one. But tonight, in this quiet moment, Evelyn Hale allowed herself to feel something dangerous and precious. Hope. Morning came with the kind of clarity that follows storms, sharp-edged and unforgiving. Evelyn woke to find Jacob already up, the smell of coffee drifting through the house. She dressed quickly and found him at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers, his face drawn with exhaustion that said he hadn't slept much. "I've been thinking," he said without preamble. "We need to move fast. Victor's not going to wait around for us to build a case. He'll push for a hearing, try to get a judgment before we can prove anything." Evelyn poured herself coffee and sat across from him. "Then we start today. Talk to the sheriff, find the lawyer, send telegrams to every town Victor might have worked in. It's going to cost money we don't have. Telegrams aren't cheap and lawyers even less so." "How much do we have?" Jacob's jaw tightened. "After buying winter or feed and paying the hands? Maybe $200. Not nearly enough if this drags on." "Then we make it enough. We sell something, cut costs, do whatever we have to do." "Evelyn, no, I won't let him win because we were too afraid to spend money defending ourselves. That ranch, this life, it's worth fighting for." He looked at her with something like wonder. "You really mean that, don't you? You've been here less than 2 months, and you're ready to gamble everything." "It's not gambling when the alternative is surrender." She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "We do this together, or we don't do it at all." Noah appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. "Are we going to town again?" "Yes, son, but this time you're staying with Mrs. Patterson next door. Mama and I have business to handle." The word slipped out so naturally that it took a moment for its significance to register. Mama. Jacob had called her that, claimed her in front of their son as if she'd always belonged there. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. Can I help? Noah asked. The best way you can help is by being good for Mrs. Patterson and doing your lessons. Can you do that? Yes, Mama. They ate a quick breakfast, then loaded into the wagon. Mrs. Patterson, a widow who ran the neighboring property with stern efficiency, took Noah without questions, though her sharp eyes missed nothing when she looked at Evelyn's new ring. Congratulations on your marriage, Mrs. Hale. I hope it brings you both happiness. The words were polite but cool, judgment lurking beneath the surface. Evelyn met her gaze steadily. Thank you. We appreciate you watching Noah. In town, they went straight to the sheriff's office. Tom Brennan looked up from his desk with an expression that said he'd been expecting them. Heard you two got married yesterday. Also heard Victor Langdon's filing assault charges and pushing for a fraud case. You've been busy. He attacked my wife with verbal abuse in public, Jacob said flatly. I defended her honor. If he wants to press charges, let him explain to a judge why he thought he could call a married woman a whore without consequences. Sheriff Brennan sighed. Sit down, both of you. We need to talk. They sat. The sheriff pulled out a file and spread it across his desk. I've been doing some digging like I promised. Sent telegrams to Cheyenne, Denver, Colorado Springs, a few other places. Got some interesting responses. Evelyn leaned forward. What did you find? 3 women in the last 18 months who reported similar schemes. Different names each time. William Garrett, Victor Langdon, Thomas Blackwell. But the descriptions match and the pattern's identical. Promises marriage, requests money for household setup, either disappears before the wedding or marries them long enough to claim legal rights to their property, then vanishes. 3 women, Evelyn breathed. Did they get their money back? 2 of them are still trying. The 3rd dropped her complaint because she couldn't afford to pursue it. But here's where it gets complicated. In each case, he was careful. Used different post offices to receive funds, moved frequently, never stayed anywhere long enough for warrants to catch up. He's slippery, and he knows how the system works. So he's done this before and he's gotten away with it, Jacob said. Until now, maybe. The fact that he's sticking around Cedar Ridge to fight this case instead of running, that tells me something's different this time. Either he's gotten arrogant or he thinks he's got a winning hand. What about the contract he's claiming Evelyn signed? She asked. I compared the signature to the letters you provided. You're right. It's a forgery, and not even a particularly good one. Problem is, proving forgery in court requires expert testimony, and we don't have access to that kind of expertise out here. A judge might look at it and decide it's close enough. Evelyn's stomach dropped. So even though it's fake, it might stand up in court? It's possible, especially if Victor gets a sympathetic judge who thinks women should honor their commitments regardless of the circumstances. Sheriff Brennan's expression was grim. I hate to say it, but the law doesn't always serve justice, particularly where women's contracts are concerned. Then what do we do? Jacob demanded. You get yourself a good lawyer, and you find those other women. If they'll testify, if we can establish a clear pattern of fraud across multiple jurisdictions, we might be able to get the territorial prosecutor involved. Turn this from a civil contract dispute into a criminal fraud case. How long will that take? Months, probably, and Victor knows it. He's counting on you not having the resources or the patience to see it through. Most people don't. Evelyn straightened her spine. We're not most people. Sheriff Brennan almost smiled. I'm starting to see that. Listen, my nephew Martin just opened a law practice here in town. He's young, still green, but he's honest and he's smart. Studied at a real law school back east. I'll introduce you, see if he'll take your case. We can't pay much, Jacob admitted. Martin knows that. He's trying to build his reputation. A case like this, fraud, forgery, defending a woman's honor against a known swindler, it's the kind of thing that could make his name if he wins. They found Martin Brennan in a cramped office above the general store, surrounded by law books and papers stacked in precarious towers. He was younger than Evelyn expected, maybe 30, with wire-rimmed spectacles and ink stains on his fingers. When Sheriff Brennan made the introductions, he listened to their story with intense focus, scribbling notes, asking sharp questions that cut right to the heart of the matter. This Victor Langdon, Martin said when they'd finished. He's made a critical error by staying to fight instead of running. That suggests either supreme confidence or desperation. My guess is desperation. He's running out of territories where his face isn't known, and he needs to win this case to rehabilitate his reputation so he can continue his schemes elsewhere. Can you help us? Evelyn asked. Martin removed his spectacles and cleaned them, thinking. I'll be honest with you, this is a difficult case. The law around mail-order bride contracts is murky at best, and there's significant prejudice against women who enter into such arrangements. Many judges view them as mercenary, willing to marry anyone for financial security, which makes them less sympathetic plaintiffs. I'm not looking for sympathy, Evelyn said. I'm looking for justice. Good. Because justice is going to require proving not just that Victor defrauded you, but that he's defrauded others, that this is his pattern of behavior. It's going to require finding those other women and convincing them to testify, which means reliving their humiliation in public. It's going to require expert analysis of the forged signature, which costs money. And it's going to require time during which Victor will be spreading rumors, damaging your reputation, making your lives as difficult as possible. How much? Jacob cut in. For your services, how much? Martin named a figure that made Jacob's face go white. Then he held up a hand. That's my standard rate. For you, I'll work for half that, plus a percentage of any damages we recover from Victor if we win. But I need to be clear. There's a very real possibility we lose. If that happens, you'll still owe me for my time, and you could end up owing Victor as well if the judge rules in his favor. And if we do nothing? Evelyn asked. He'll pursue the case anyway. You'll have no representation, and you'll almost certainly lose by default. At which point he can claim damages, possibly force Jacob to sell property to satisfy the judgment, and your marriage could be annulled as a fraudulent attempt to avoid legal obligations. The silence in the small office was suffocating. Evelyn looked at Jacob and saw her own fear reflected in his eyes. They were trapped between impossible choices: fight and risk losing everything, or surrender and lose everything anyway. We fight, Jacob said finally. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes. We fight. Martin nodded slowly. Then we have a lot of work to do. First, I need every scrap of correspondence between you and Victor. Every letter, every receipt, every piece of evidence that documents your interactions. Second, I need you to write down everything you remember about your arrangement with him, every promise he made, every request for money, every detail. Third, we need to locate those other women the sheriff mentioned and convince them to help us. How do we find them? Evelyn asked. The sheriff has their names and last known locations. We send letters, telegrams, make personal visits if necessary. We build a case brick by brick until it's too solid to ignore. They spent the next 3 hours in Martin's office, going through every detail of Evelyn's correspondence with Victor, comparing dates and facts, looking for inconsistencies in his story. Martin was methodical, relentless, questioning everything until Evelyn's head spun. Here, he said finally, pointing to a letter. He claims he owns a 1,000-acre ranch outside Cedar Ridge, but the county records show no property in any of his known names. He's lying about his assets. Can we prove that in court? Jacob asked. Absolutely. I'll subpoena the land records. If he's claiming property he doesn't own, that's fraud in itself. By the time they left Martin's office, the sun was setting and Evelyn's hand ached from writing. They collected Noah from Mrs. Patterson, who handed him over with a tight smile and eyes full of questions she was too polite to ask. On the ride home, Noah fell asleep between them, his head on Evelyn's shoulder. Jacob drove in silence, his face carved from stone. Tell me the truth, Evelyn said quietly. Can we afford this? The lawyer's fees, the time it will take, the risk? No, Jacob said. We can't afford it. But we can't afford not to fight either, so we'll make it work somehow. I could try to find work in town. Sewing, washing, anything that brings in money. You're already working from dawn to dusk, managing the house and helping with Noah. I won't ask you to take on more. Then what? Jacob's hands tightened on the reins. I've got some cattle I can sell early. Won't get top price, but it'll bring in cash. And there's Sarah's jewelry. Nothing fancy, but it's gold. Should be worth something. Jacob, no. That's all you have left of her. It's metal and stones. What I have left of Sarah is our son and the ranch she loved. If selling her jewelry keeps both of those safe, she'd want me to do it. Evelyn didn't argue. She understood the mathematics of survival, the brutal calculus of what mattered versus what could be sacrificed. They'd both given up so much already. What was a little more? The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of frantic activity. Martin sent telegrams to the women Sheriff Brennan had identified. Jacob sold 15 head of cattle in Sarah's jewelry box. Evelyn wrote letter after letter, documenting every interaction with Victor, every promise he'd made, every red flag she'd ignored in her desperation. The first response came from a woman named Margaret Chen in Denver. Her letter was brief, bitter, and unequivocal. I will not testify. I will not relive that humiliation in public. He took my money and my dignity. I won't give him the satisfaction of destroying me again. I'm sorry, but I can't help you. The second woman, Catherine Reeves from Colorado Springs, didn't respond at all. The third, Anna Kowalski from Cheyenne, sent a telegram that made Evelyn's hand shake when she read it. I will testify. When and where? We've got one, Martin said when she showed him the telegram. That's a start. One credible witness with a similar story can establish pattern. If we can get her here to testify, it could make all the difference. Victor will try to discredit her, Jacob warned. Of course he will. That's why we need to prepare her. Make sure her story is airtight. Document everything. I'll travel to Cheyenne next week to interview her in person. But before Martin could make the trip, Victor made his move. It was a Sunday morning, and they just returned from church. A deliberate show of normalcy. Evelyn in her best dress, Jacob in his suit, Noah scrubbed clean and squirming in the pew. Reverend Walsh had greeted them warmly, and a few townspeople had nodded acknowledgement, though most still kept their distance. They were halfway home when they saw the smoke. Black, thick, rising from the direction of the ranch in a column that stained the sky. Jacob whipped the horses into a gallop, the wagon bouncing dangerously over the rough road. Evelyn held Noah tight, her heart hammering against her ribs. When they crested the final hill, they saw the barn engulfed in flames. Jacob leaped from the wagon before it fully stopped, running toward the inferno. The horses inside were screaming, a sound that scraped against Evelyn's soul. She grabbed Noah and pulled him away from the wagon, shielding his eyes. "Stay here! Don't move!" She ran after Jacob, who was throwing open the barn doors despite the wall of heat that slammed into him. Smoke poured out, thick and choking. Through the haze, she could see horses rearing, panicked, trapped in their stalls. Jacob disappeared into the smoke. Evelyn heard him coughing, heard the crash of wood as he kicked open stall doors. A horse burst out, wild-eyed and terrified, then another. She counted them. 3, 4, 5. How many had been inside? 6? 7? Jacob emerged, leading a mare by her halter, his face blackened with soot. He shoved the horse toward Evelyn and turned back. "Jacob, no! It's too dangerous!" "There's one more!" He vanished into the smoke again. The barn groaned, timbers cracking under the immense heat. Evelyn watched in horror as part of the roof collapsed inward, sending up a shower of sparks. "Jacob!" Seconds stretched into eternities. Then he appeared, stumbling, coughing violently, dragging a terrified gelding behind him. They made it 3 steps before a beam fell, missing Jacob by inches. He released the horse and fell to his knees, gasping for air. Evelyn ran to him, helped him away from the flames. His hands were blistered, his eyebrows singed, his clothes smoking. "Are you hurt? Jacob, talk to me." "I'm fine. The horses?" "All out. You got them all." He nodded, still coughing, and turned to watch his barn burn. The structure was lost. The flames had consumed everything, turning wood and hay into ash. All they could do was stand there and watch it collapse in on itself while neighbors arrived too late with buckets and concern. Sheriff Brennan showed up an hour later, his face grim. He walked the perimeter of the smoking ruins, examined the ground, conferred with Jacob in low tones. When he came back to where Evelyn stood with Noah, his expression was dark. It was arson, clear as day. Someone spread kerosene around the base, lit it, and walked away. The burn pattern doesn't lie. "Victor," Evelyn said flatly. "Can't prove it without a witness, but I'd bet my badge he's behind this." "What can you do?" "Not much without evidence. I'll ask around, see if anyone saw anything suspicious. But fires happen out here. Wood structures, dry hay, accidents are common. Even with my suspicions, I can't arrest a man on speculation." Jacob joined them, his face unreadable. "How much damage?" Barn's a total loss. You're looking at least $500 to rebuild, probably more, plus the feed and equipment you lost inside. $500 they didn't have. Evelyn saw the number settle over Jacob like a weight, crushing the hope they'd been carefully building. He's escalating, Martin said when they told him about the fire the next morning, trying to break you financially and psychologically, make you too afraid and too poor to fight. It's working, Jacob said bleakly. Between the lawyer fees and now this, I'm finished. I'll have to sell cattle at a loss just to get through winter, and we still need to rebuild before snow comes. Unless we end this now, Evelyn said. Everyone turned to look at her. Victor wants me to surrender, to come begging. What if I do? Absolutely not, Jacob said. Listen to me. What if I arrange a meeting with him, pretend I'm willing to negotiate? If he admits anything, if he brags about the fire or about the other women, anything we can use, we record it, use it as evidence. How would you record it? Martin asked carefully. You'd be hidden nearby, listening. You're a lawyer. Your testimony about what you heard would carry weight in court. It's too dangerous, Jacob said. He's violent. Look at what he did to the barn. What's to stop him from hurting you? I'll meet him in public, the hotel restaurant, lots of witnesses. He won't risk anything obvious. Martin frowned, thinking, it's risky, but it might work. If he's arrogant enough, and from everything I've seen he is, he might incriminate himself. But Mrs. Hale, you need to understand the danger. If he suspects you're trying to trap him, he could turn violent. Or he could say nothing useful and you've wasted the opportunity. It's better than waiting for him to burn down the house next, Evelyn said. Jacob grabbed her hand. I don't like this. I don't want you anywhere near him. Neither do I. But what choice do we have? We're running out of time and money. If there's even a chance this works, we have to try. The argument went on for another hour, but eventually, Jacob's resistance crumbled under the weight of their circumstances. They sent word to Victor through an intermediary, the hotel clerk, that Mrs. Hale wished to discuss a settlement. His response came within hours. Tomorrow, noon, the hotel restaurant. Come alone. That night, Evelyn barely slept. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to the house settle around her, thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. Victor could hurt her. He could refuse to say anything incriminating. He could trap her somehow, turn her own plan against her. But doing nothing meant watching Jacob lose everything. It meant letting Victor win. She rose before dawn and dressed carefully in a simple but respectable dress. She wanted to look defeated, but not broken, desperate, but not pathetic. Jacob waited in the kitchen, his face haggard. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. If anything happens, if he tries anything, Martin will be at the next table. The sheriff knows what we're planning. I'll be as safe as I can be. Jacob pulled her into a sudden, fierce embrace. Come back to me. To us. I will, I promise. The ride into town was silent. Martin met them at his office, went over the plan one final time, reminded Evelyn what to listen for, what questions to ask. Then it was time. The hotel restaurant was half full when she entered, townspeople eating late breakfast or early lunch. Victor sat at a corner table, dressed impeccably, drinking coffee like he didn't have a care in the world. He stood when he saw her, his smile sharp as broken glass. Evelyn, I'm so glad you've come to your senses. She sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. I'm here to talk. That's all. Of course. I'm a reasonable man. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that satisfies us both. At the next table, hidden behind a newspaper, Martin Brennan listened with every fiber of his being. And at a table near the door, Sheriff Tom Brennan pretended to eat lunch while watching every movement Victor made. Evelyn took a breath and began the most important performance of her life. I can't afford to fight you in court. The fire destroyed any savings we had. I need this to end. Victor's smile widened. I thought you might see it that way. The fire was unfortunate, wasn't it? Unfortunate, she repeated, her voice hollow. Is that what you call it? Accidents happen on ranches, especially when people are distracted by legal troubles. His eyes glittered with malice. But these things can be avoided if everyone acts sensibly. What do you want from me? What I've always wanted. For you to honor our agreement. Become my wife, and all of this goes away.
Evelyn forced herself to meet his eyes. And if I refuse? Then I'll continue pursuing my legal claim. I'll win. We both know that. Jacob Hale will lose his ranch paying what you owe me. Your marriage will be annulled. And you'll end up exactly where you would have been if you'd never met him, except now you'll have destroyed an innocent man's life in the process. He leaned forward. Is your pride really worth that much? Every word was calculated cruelty, designed to break her. And sitting there, meeting his cold, predatory gaze, Evelyn understood something crucial. He enjoyed this. The manipulation, the control, the slow destruction of hope. It wasn't about the money for him. It was about power, about proving he could take everything from someone and walk away untouched. She would not let him win. You're right, Evelyn said softly, letting her shoulders slump in apparent defeat. My pride has cost too much already. I'm tired of fighting. Victor's expression shifted to triumph, but she saw the flicker of surprise beneath it. He hadn't expected her to break this easily. A wise decision. I knew you'd come around eventually. But I need to understand something first. She kept her voice small, broken. Why did you do this? You could have married any number of women, honestly. Why the deception? He laughed, low and cruel. Honestly? Because honest women ask questions. They want courtship and conversation and all that tiresome nonsense. Women like you, desperate, alone, running out of options. You're grateful just to be wanted. You don't ask difficult questions. You send money when asked. You show up when told. You're easy. The word hit like a slap, but Evelyn didn't flinch. At the next table, she heard Martin's newspaper rustle slightly. I see. And the others, the women in Denver and Cheyenne and Colorado Springs, were they easy too? Victor's eyes narrowed slightly. What others? The sheriff told me about them. The other women you did this to. Margaret Chen, Catherine Reeves, Anna Kowalski. Were they as easy as me? For a moment, something dangerous flickered across his face. Then he smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. I've made honest proposals to a few women over the years. If some of them changed their minds, that's hardly my fault. Changed their minds? Or discovered you'd lied about everything, just like you lied to me? Careful, Evelyn. You're here to negotiate, not make accusations. I'm here for the truth. Did you set that fire? Did you burn Jacob's barn to force me into surrendering? Victor leaned back in his chair, his expression calculating. I think you're confused about how this works. You're the one who owes me, remember? You're the one who broke our contract. Whatever misfortunes have befallen Mr. Hale are merely the natural consequences of your poor choices. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting. He signaled the waiter for more coffee, his movements relaxed, confident. Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to agree to repay me the $300 plus an additional $200 for damages to my reputation and the costs of pursuing this legal claim. You'll sign a promissory note secured against the ranch, and you'll publicly acknowledge that your marriage to Jacob Hale was fraudulent, entered into solely to avoid your obligations to me. And if I do all that, you'll drop the case? Eventually. Once I have my money and my reputation restored. Of course, collecting will take time, years probably, but I'm a patient man. Evelyn understood then. He didn't want resolution. He wanted leverage. A promissory note secured against the ranch meant he could control them indefinitely, demand payment whenever it suited him, threaten foreclosure as a weapon. They'd never be free of him. What makes you think Jacob will agree to use his ranch as collateral for my debt? Because he's already in love with you, the poor fool. Didn't take long, did it? Widower, lonely, desperate for someone to fill the void. You played him perfectly. I almost admire it. I didn't play him. I earned my place in that family, honestly. Please, you showed up with nothing, offered yourself as cheap labor, and wormed your way into his bed and his bank account within weeks. If I'd pulled the same scheme, people would call it fraud. But because you're a woman, it's romance. His smile was vicious. We're not so different, you and I. We both do what we must to survive. The only difference is, I'm honest about it. The comparison made Evelyn's skin crawl. I'm nothing like you. Keep telling yourself that. Meanwhile, I'll take that promissory note. I have the paperwork right here. He pulled documents from his coat pocket, already prepared, and spread them on the table.
Evelyn stared at the words swimming before her eyes. $500. Secured against the Hale Ranch, payable on demand with 60 days' notice, transferable to any creditor of Victor's choosing. It was a trap that would never release them. Even if they scraped together the money somehow, he could sell the note to someone else, extend the timeline, keep them indebted forever. And if they missed a single payment, he could force the sale of everything Jacob had built. I need time to think. You've had weeks to think. Sign now, or I withdraw the offer and pursue full damages in court. Make your choice. Evelyn's hand trembled as she reached for the pen he offered. She touched the paper, hesitated, looked up at him. Did you ever intend to marry me? Or was it always just about the money? Does it matter? Yes, it matters to me. Victor sighed as if she were being tedious. Fine. No, I never intended to marry you. The photograph I sent, borrowed from a ranch hand in Cheyenne. The letters? Half of them were written by a woman I paid in Denver who has better penmanship than I do. The promises about partnership and building a life together? Complete fiction. I needed your money, you provided it, and that should have been the end of it. But you had to go and complicate things by finding someone to protect you. So everything was a lie. Everything except the contract, which is legally binding regardless of my intentions. Now sign. She picked up the pen. Behind Victor, she saw Martin carefully fold his newspaper. At the door, Sheriff Brennan stood up from his table. Evelyn met Victor's eyes one last time. No. The single word hung in the air like a gunshot. Victor's face darkened. What did you say? I said no. I won't sign. I won't pay you. I won't help you destroy my family. She stood, her voice growing stronger. You're a fraud and a predator. You've hurt women across 3 territories, stolen their money, destroyed their lives, but you're not destroying mine. Victor shot to his feet, grabbing her wrist hard enough to bruise. You stupid little... That's enough, Langdon. Sheriff Brennan's hand landed heavy on Victor's shoulder. Let her go. Victor released her wrist and spun to face the sheriff. This is a private conversation. Not anymore. I heard every word, so did my nephew. Martin Brennan stood, revealing himself. Confession to fraud, admission of deception across multiple territories, threats of financial extortion, that's more than enough to arrest you right now. You can't prove anything. It's her word against mine. Actually, it's 3 witnesses against yours, Martin said calmly. The sheriff, myself, and Mrs. Hale. And we have Anna Kowalski arriving on tomorrow's train to testify about what you did to her. Once we add her testimony to what you just admitted, we'll have you on multiple counts of fraud. The color drained from Victor's face. This was a setup. Yes, Evelyn said. It was. You can't do this. That conversation was private. You tricked me. I asked you questions, and you answered honestly for the first time in your miserable life, Evelyn said. If the truth incriminates you, that's your problem, not mine. Victor's hand moved toward his coat, but Sheriff Brennan was faster. He had his revolver out before Victor's fingers found whatever he'd been reaching for. Don't. I'd hate to shoot you in a crowded restaurant, but I will if you give me cause. I was just getting my handkerchief. You're overreacting. Then move your hand real slow and show me. Victor complied, producing a derringer so small it fit in his palm. Sheriff Brennan took it, along with the knife he found in Victor's boot, and another small pistol hidden at the small of his back. Well armed for a simple lunch meeting, almost like you were planning something. A man has a right to protect himself. Not when he's threatening women and committing fraud. He doesn't. Victor Langdon, I'm arresting you for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to commit arson. You have the right to secure legal counsel, and anything you say can be used against you in court. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Every eye in the place watched as the sheriff locked iron manacles around Victor's wrists. His face was purple with rage and humiliation. This isn't over. I'll have lawyers from Denver here within days. I'll sue you all for false arrest, slander, conspiracy. You do that, Sheriff Brennan said mildly. Meanwhile, you'll be enjoying the hospitality of the Cedar Ridge Jail. I've got a nice cell waiting for you. As they led him away, Victor turned to Evelyn one last time. You think you've won? You've just made everything worse. When I get out, and I will get out, I'll destroy you. I'll take everything you love and burn it to the ground.
Try it, Evelyn said quietly. I'll be ready. They dragged him out, still shouting threats. The moment the door closed behind them, Evelyn's legs gave out. Martin caught her, eased her back into her chair. You did beautifully. That was incredibly brave. I was terrified the whole time. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. He smiled. You got him to confess to everything we needed. Multiple counts of fraud, admission of the scheme, even confirmation about the other victims. With Anna Kowalski's testimony, we have enough to put him away for years. What happens now? We build the formal case, document everything he said, get sworn statements from all the witnesses, prepare for trial. But the immediate threat is over. He can't hurt you from jail. Can he make bail? Not if I have anything to say about it. I'll argue he's a flight risk with a history of fleeing jurisdiction. And given what we now know about his activities across multiple territories, I think the judge will agree. Evelyn nodded, but she couldn't quite believe it yet. After weeks of fear and fighting, after losing so much, the idea that it might actually be over felt impossible. Jacob burst through the door 3 minutes later, Noah right behind him. He'd clearly been waiting outside, giving her space but staying close in case she needed him. His eyes swept over her, checking for injuries. Are you hurt? Did he touch you? I'm fine. It's over. The sheriff arrested him. Jacob pulled her into his arms, and she felt the tremors running through him. When I saw him grab your wrist, I almost came in there guns blazing. Martin had to physically restrain me. I'm glad he did. We needed Victor to talk, to incriminate himself. If you'd intervened, we might not have gotten the confession. To hell with the confession. He put his hands on you. And now he's in jail for it, along with everything else. She pulled back to look at him. We won, Jacob. It's really over. Noah had been listening with wide eyes. The bad man can't hurt us anymore? No, sweetheart. He can't hurt us anymore. The next few days passed in a blur of legal proceedings. Anna Kowalski arrived as promised, a severe woman in her 40s with eyes that had seen too much suffering. Her testimony was devastating. She described in painful detail how Victor had courted her, requested money for ranch improvements, married her in a hasty ceremony, then disappeared 3 days later with her entire dowry. She'd spent 2 years trying to find him, following his trail across territories, always one step behind. When Sheriff Brennan contacted me, I dropped everything, she said. Not for the money. I've made my peace with that loss. But to stop him from doing this to someone else. To make sure he faces justice for once. Margaret Chen sent a letter, changing her mind about testifying. Seeing that you've arrested him gives me hope that maybe this time will be different. I'll come if you need me. Catherine Reeves remained silent, but Martin said 2 witnesses plus Victor's own confession was more than enough. The preliminary hearing was held a week later in the town hall, packed with spectators hungry for drama. Victor appeared in chains, his expensive suit rumpled, his face haggard. He'd secured a lawyer from Denver, an oily man who tried every trick to get the charges dismissed. But Martin Brennan was ready. He presented the witnesses, the forged contract, the evidence of fraud across multiple territories. He played the sheriff, and his own testimony against Victor's recorded statements at the restaurant. He brought in the hotel clerk who'd taken money from Victor the day Evelyn arrived. Money Victor claimed he'd spent preparing for their marriage, but which the clerk swore was payment for a room reserved for only one night. The judge, a stern woman named Margaret Hartford, who'd seen her share of frontier justice, listened to everything with a face like granite. When the defense lawyer tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, that Victor was a legitimate businessman being persecuted by a vengeful woman, Judge Hartford cut him off. Counselor, I've heard enough. The evidence shows a clear pattern of fraud, forgery, and extortion. The defendant has admitted to most of these crimes in his own words, witnessed by 3 credible people, including the town sheriff. Unless you have evidence to the contrary, actual evidence, not speculation about Mrs. Hale's character, I suggest you save it for trial. Your Honor, I move to dismiss all charges on the grounds of motion denied. The defendant will stand trial on all counts. Given his history of fleeing jurisdiction and the serious nature of these charges, bail is denied. He'll remain in custody until trial. She banged her gavel. We're adjourned. Victor erupted, shouting about injustice and corruption, but the bailiff dragged him away.
Judge Hartford caught Evelyn's eye across the courtroom and gave her the smallest nod of acknowledgement. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Evelyn braced herself for judgment, for the whispers and accusations. But instead, a woman stepped forward, one of the severe matrons who'd stared at her in church. "Mrs. Hale, I owe you an apology. We all do. We judged you harshly, assumed the worst, but you showed more courage than most of us could muster. Thank you for standing up to that man." Others murmured agreement. Not everyone. There were still plenty who looked at her with suspicion and disdain. But enough that Evelyn felt something shift, a crack in the wall of isolation she'd been living behind. The trial itself took place 3 weeks later. Martin built an airtight case, witness by witness, document by document. Anna Kowalski's testimony brought several women in the gallery to tears. When the forged signature was presented next to Evelyn's actual handwriting, even Victor's lawyer looked uncomfortable. The defense's strategy was to attack Evelyn's character, to suggest she was a schemer who'd willingly entered a business arrangement and then reneged when she found better prospects. But every attempt fell flat against the weight of evidence. The jury, 12 men and women from surrounding counties, deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Victor Langdon was sentenced to 8 years in the territorial prison, plus restitution to all his victims. The judge ordered him to repay every dollar he'd stolen, with interest. It was more than he had, which meant the court would seize and sell any assets he possessed. When the verdict was read, Victor's eyes found Evelyn across the courtroom. There was no triumph in his expression, no regret, just cold, calculated hatred. She met his gaze steadily and refused to look away. He'd tried to break her, to reduce her to nothing. Instead, she'd helped put him in chains. They let him out in shackles, and this time he didn't shout threats. He just walked, his head high, already planning his next move. Men like Victor never truly surrendered, but for now, at least, he was locked away where he couldn't hurt anyone. Outside the courthouse, Sheriff Brennan shook Jacob's hand. "That barn fire? We found evidence linking Langdon to it. Witness saw him in the area that morning, and we recovered a kerosene can with his fingerprints. I've added arson to his sentence. He'll be away for closer to 12 years now. Thank you, Tom, for everything. Thank your wife. She's the one who caught him." That night, back at the ranch, they sat on the porch as the sun set over the mountains. Noah was already asleep, exhausted from the emotional upheaval of the trial. Jacob and Evelyn sat in their usual spots, shoulders touching, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep purple. "It's really over," Jacob said quietly. "Yes. I keep expecting him to show up somehow, to find a way to hurt us even from prison. He might try. Men like that don't change, but we'll be ready if he does." Jacob turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the last light of day. "When I offered you this marriage, it was supposed to be practical. A business arrangement to solve a problem. I remember. Somewhere along the way, it stopped being practical." His voice was rough with emotion. "You're not hired help, Evelyn. You're not a convenience. You're my partner, my friend, the person I want beside me when everything falls apart and when everything's right. You're the mother Noah needed and the strength I couldn't find on my own." Evelyn felt tears sliding down her face. "Jacob, let me finish. I know this isn't what either of us planned. I know you married me to escape Victor, and I married you to protect you. But somewhere in the fighting and the fear and the struggle, I fell in love with you, really in love, not the practical kind. And I need you to know that, even if you don't feel the same way." She turned to face him fully, taking his scarred, work-roughened hands in hers. "You think I don't feel the same way? Jacob, I chose you over safety. I chose you over surrender. When Victor offered me a way out, when he said he'd drop everything if I'd just leave you, I didn't even consider it. Not for a second. Because this ranch, this family, you're my home. The first real home I've had since my father died." "You mean that?" "Every word. I love you, Jacob Hale. Not because you rescued me, but because you stood beside me and let me be strong. Because you trusted me with your son's heart. Because you look at me like I'm worth fighting for." He kissed her then, properly, for the first time since their wedding day. Not the brief, formal brush of lips at the altar, but a real kiss full of promise and hope, and the kind of love that grows from shared hardship. When they broke apart, both were trembling. "We should probably rebuild that barn," Jacob said, and she laughed through her tears. "Probably, among other things. The restitution money from Victor will help. Won't cover everything, but it's a start. We'll make do, we always do." They sat there as the stars emerged one by one, filling the enormous Wyoming sky. Somewhere in the house, Noah stirred and called out in his sleep. Evelyn rose to check on him, and Jacob followed. They stood together in the doorway of the boy's room, watching him sleep with the peaceful abandon of childhood. "He asked me today if you were going to leave now that the bad man is gone," Jacob said quietly. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you're his mama, and mamas don't leave." Then I held my breath, hoping I wasn't lying. Evelyn took his hand. "You weren't lying. I'm not going anywhere. This is my family now, my home, my life, for better or worse, through every trial that comes. I'm here." "For better or worse," Jacob echoed, and she heard the weight of vow in it. They stood there in the peaceful darkness, three people who'd been broken in different ways, finding wholeness in each other. Tomorrow they'd start rebuilding, the barn, their savings, their place in the community. There would be hard work ahead, lean times, challenges they couldn't yet imagine. But tonight, they had this, a family bound not by blood or desperation, but by choice, by the conscious decision to stand together, to fight for each other, to build something real from the ruins of what they'd lost. Evelyn had come to Wyoming alone, abandoned, with nothing but $17 and a broken heart. She'd been deceived, threatened, nearly destroyed, but she'd also found something she'd stopped believing existed, a second chance, a new beginning, a love that didn't require her to be anything other than exactly who she was. She thought about the woman she'd been when she stepped off that train, scanning the platform for a man who'd never existed. That woman had been so afraid, so desperate, so certain she was running out of chances. If she could go back and tell her that 6 months later she'd be standing in this house, with a husband she loved and a son who called her mama, that she'd have survived a legal battle and won, that she'd have found her strength in the fighting, that woman wouldn't have believed it. But Evelyn believed it now. She believed in the life she'd built, the family she'd chosen, the future they'd create together. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, nothing worthwhile ever was, but they'd walk it together, and that made all the difference. Spring came early the next year. The rebuilt barn stood strong against the Wyoming winds, larger than the old one, built with timber from their own land and labor from neighbors who'd finally accepted Evelyn as one of their own. The cattle were thriving. Noah had grown 2 inches and could read simple books on his own. And on a warm April morning, Evelyn stood on the porch watching her son chase chickens around the yard while her husband repaired a fence line in the distance. She rested one hand on her swelling belly, feeling the flutter of new life growing inside her. They'd decided not to tell Noah yet, wanted to wait until they were certain. But sometimes, when she caught Jacob looking at her with that expression of wonder and love, she knew he was thinking about the future they were building, not just surviving, but truly living. The past would always be part of their story. Sarah's memory still lived in the ranch she'd loved, in the son she'd left behind, in the lessons she'd taught about strength and grace. Victor Langdon's shadow would linger too, a reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. But the past didn't define them. What defined them was the choice they made every morning to wake up and build something better, something lasting, something true. Evelyn had arrived in Wyoming unwanted and alone, a mail-order bride abandoned by a fraud. She'd endured humiliation, fought legal battles, faced down a predator, and emerged stronger than she'd ever imagined possible. Now she stood on her own porch, on her own land, watching her family, carrying new life, and feeling something she'd thought was lost forever. Peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the deep certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together, as partners, as equals, as family. The wind carried the scent of sage and new grass across the valley. In the distance, the mountains stood eternal, witnesses to countless stories of struggle and survival, hope and heartbreak. Evelyn's story was just one among thousands, but it was hers. She'd written it with courage and tears and an unwillingness to accept defeat. And it was far from over. This was just the beginning. Jacob finished his work and started walking toward the house, his stride long and purposeful.
Noah saw him and ran to meet him, and her husband scooped their son into his arms, making him shriek with laughter. They came toward her together, and when Jacob reached the porch, he set Noah down and pulled Evelyn close, his hand settling naturally on the small of her back. "You all right?" he asked, searching her face. "Better than all right. I'm happy." He smiled, the full, genuine smile that still took her breath away. "Me too." They stood there together as the sun climbed higher, warming the earth, promising growth and change and all the seasons yet to come. Whatever trials lay ahead, they'd meet them the same way they'd met everything else, together. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.